I want to pick up somebody's comments because they're very interesting, and I'm terribly grateful to him, I presume it is a him, Adrian Lee, who excoriates me for and says that well, let me read it. You're always telling us that you are a one nation Tory. I don't think I always tell people that. I think I've probably mentioned it once or twice, and then I've qualified it. In this video, you have revealed that you are nothing of the sort. First, and there's a video about Farage and Boris Johnson. Firstly, you advance a paranoid conspiracy theory related to the political advance of both Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. According to you, there are business interests operating in the shadows. I don't think these are business interests. Here we go again. The same all-hate tropes that have been trotted out for centuries. Secondly, you promote equally hateful lie that Johnson killed 23,000 people by not locking down a week earlier. This figure was introduced by the completely discredited Professor Neil Ferguson. It is based upon his dodgy guesswork, and nobody has provided analysis of this statistic. Frankly, he wasn't a very good Prime Minister, but like most on the left, I'm not on the left, you are seeking to paint him with the fascist brush. Not at all. In the run-up to last year's general election, Sunak was continually criticised by you. I don't think he was. I rather like Sunak. Likewise, for the past year, you have been perpetually throwing excrement at Kemi Badenoch. Absolutely. Anybody from the right who has gone so far in criticism of a black female politician from the left would doubtlessly have been denounced by you as practicing dog whistle tactics. No. Now, you ask Conservative voters to vote tactically to keep this incompetent and thoroughly rotten Labour government in power, and what's more, you actually believe that we will do it by believing that it will keep Farage out. I'm not sure that's exactly what I said, but I'll come back to all that in a minute or so. Sorry, nice try, but we are not that desperate or stupid. I hope not. Farage is highly unlikely to win anyway. That's what I initially claimed, regardless of the opinion polls say 4 years before the ballot. If people are fed up with rocketing taxes in a rapidly declining country, perhaps they should vote tactically to get rid of Labour. Well, I think that's a fascinating and really very, very cogent argument. The fact that I'm the object of a lot of it doesn't make me any the less impressed by it. It is spirited, but it is wrong on substance, tone, and method. And I hope Adrian enjoys my response. I've thought quite hard about this one. So let me take his claims in the order that matters, not quite in the order that he gives them. First, the label game. He scolds me for calling myself a one nation Tory, as if that phrase has a single stable meaning that I have somehow betrayed. Historically, it does not. The phrase one nation enters conservative thought through Disraeli's fear that industrial Britain had split into two nations of rich and poor, and his answer was a paternalistic reforming conservatism that bound classes together by obligation and social policy. That is the Disraeli that I would be invoking. Over the 20th century, one nation gets repeatedly reworked. Stanley Baldwin and later Macmillan used it to justify a broad church, state capacity, welfare settlement, conservatism, and an anti-extremist temper. In the late 20th and early 21st century media, it slid further into a shorthand for centrist, managerial, civilized Tory who dislikes ideological frameworks. And some writers even argue that the modern One Nation badge is more Baldwin than Disraeli. I am not there. And when I say that I am a wet Tory after Norman St. John Stevers modelled in his image, I hope, I'm not performing a bait and switch. I'm placing myself in an older Disraelian Macmillanite line of what I hope is humane, culturally serious, institution-loving conservatism that thinks the state can be a moral instrument when society phrased. That is compatible with one nation in its original sense. The fact that Adrian wants the term to mean anti-reform, pro-market, culture, war, sceptic, and never rude about Tory leaders is his attempt to freeze a living tradition at the moment most convenient to his faction. It is not scholarship, it is branding. Second, the conspiracy slur. Adrian frames my argument as paranoid and then insinuates, without quite daring to say so directly, that I'm echoing ancient hate traps. So does he say it directly? I don't remember. That is rhetorical bullying. A conspiracy theory is a specific thing. It makes a confident, evidence-free claim that a hidden group is directing events. What I did, or as I described it, I think was different. I asked a political question about selection, patronage, media ecosystems, money and networks. How did a figure, this is my question, how did a figure as chaotic as Boris Johnson, whom I knew in Oxford, end up in number 10? And how are similar publicity and donor circuits now boosting Farage? Asking that question is not bigoted nor irrational. It is the minimum vigilance a citizen owes a democracy. It's the minimum vigilance that a subject of His Majesty owes to the scrutiny of the parliamentary process. More to the point, recent British politics makes the question feel reasonable. Johnson was in many ways an extraordinary candidate for the premiership, a comic classicist with a record of indiscipline, a talent for performance and a willingness to treat institutions as props. Even many admirers sensed the absurdity, but Johnson was hardly the only improbable lodger recently of number 10. Theresa May arrived on a tiny selectorate mandate, then governed in a fog of Brexit fracture. Liz Truss detonated her own government in weeks by pursuing a reckless fiscal experiment. Andrea Leadsom, with whom I squabbled over student visas, was briefly floated as a potential prime minister on the basis of factional arithmetic rather than national stature. And the Conservative Party's recent leader selection has often resembled a series of internal spasms rather than a calm search for statecraft. And if we widen the lens, and this I find so extraordinary, if we widen the lens to Home Secretaries from the Truss era onwards, though you could possibly push back to Blunkett, the office has sometimes looked like a revolving door for various ideological auditions rather than a seat of measured authority. In a system producing that much instability across both major parties, because we have to include Shabana Mahmood in this now, it is not outlandish to wonder whether incentive structures, elite gatekeeping, media capture or donor pressure are distorting the outcome. That is sociology, not paranoia. Third, the COVID point. Adrian says, I repeat, a hateful lie that Johnson killed 23,000 people, and he dismisses the number as Neil Ferguson's dodgy guesswork. Well, I'm not a fan of Neil Ferguson, but this week's official COVID inquiry report, chaired by Baroness Heather Hallett, explicitly concluded that delaying the first lockdown by about a week led to around 23,000 avoidable deaths in England, and described the core culture of decision-making as too little too late. That is not a Ferguson meme. It is now an institutional finding supported across major outlets and in the inquiry's own publication. Now, it's possible to concede two sensible nuances without retreating an inch on accountability. One, counterfactual modelling always has error bars. Two, responsibility is shared across cabinet, civil service, devolved governments and the scientific advisory system. The inquiry says as much. But Adrian's move is to treat uncertainty as exoneration. That is intellectually lazy. If a government is warned, dithers, and the best available reconstructions show tens of thousands of deaths tied to that dithering, then moral responsibility follows, even if the number is a range, not a marble tablet. Johnson's own furious rejection of the report proves he understands the charge and fears its force. So Adrian is wrong to call it completely discredited. What is discredited is the habit of using models are imperfect as a magic spell that voids the duty of care. Fourth, the identity politics swipe. He claims that if someone on the right criticised a black female politician on the left, as sharply as I have criticised Kemi Badenoch, then I would denounce it as a dog whistle form of racism. That is a cheap prophylactic. It tries to make Badenoch criticism costlier by pre-labelling the critic as a racist or a hypocrite. I don't think I have ever referenced even Kemi Badenoch's gender when talking about her inability. Her ability or her inability is independent of her race. So of course, she now says that she is not Nigerian, she is British. Fine, and I'm perfectly prepared to accept that. She could say she's not female. I'm perfectly prepared to accept that. But she can't stand up and say that she is not incompetent, because that I'm not prepared to say. Politics is not a nursery where we hand out criticism by demographic quota. Badenoch is the leader of His Majesty's opposition. She is a big political actor. If her arguments are flimsy, her strategy incoherent, or her temperament ill-suited to rebuilding a shattered party, she should be criticised on those grounds exactly as any male or white predecessor was criticised. I remember very much the interview that Thatcher gave to Wogan, and he asked, Are you worried that you might be criticised as a woman? And she says, why? I don't criticise the men for being men. Precisely. We get to a certain point in the running of our country where we need to think beyond gender. We need to think about somebody who can actually do the job. Kemi Badenoch cannot. She is wrecking her party, and she is not adding to the governance of the country. And that is the point. Shielding her from scrutiny in the name of anti-racism or gender politics is itself some form of infantilization. The fifth, tactical voting and farage. Adrian says Conservative voters will not vote tactically to keep Labour in, and that I am insulting them by suggesting it. Well, notice what Adrian does here. He slides from a descriptive claim to a moral huff. The descriptive claim is contestable because in a multi-party system with reform surging, tactical voting becomes rational whether you prefer the second best to the worst. Whether Tory voters will do it depends on constituency, maths and perceived threat. But the moral huff, we are not stupid, is theatre. I never said you were stupid. I said that if the priority is to prevent a Farage government, then Tories may sometimes have to act strategically rather than tribally. And that's not necessarily to keep Labour in power. It might be, for example, to elect a Lib Dem government, or indeed to see a conservative minority government propped up by Lib Dem or the Greens or even the SNP. It's all tactical. It's all tactical to keep out Farage. That is not contempt, that is arithmetic. And if Adrian wants to be empirical, he should look at the last few years. Voters of all parties have used tactical voting to block outcomes they fear more than they dislike their nearest rival. It is one of the few remaining instruments people have got against an electoral system that often rewards the loudest insurgent with a concentrated base. Finally, there is a tone problem in Adrian's comment that matters as much as the factual errors. He doesn't just disagree, he pathologizes. He calls me paranoid, hateful, leftist, anti-Tory, and then ends by insisting that I want to keep a rotten Labour government in power. My position is simpler and more conservative than that caricature. I am saying two things at once. The post-2019 Conservative Party has behaved with such negligence that it forfeited trust. and a Farage-led government would likely intensify theatrical incompetence into something graver. That is a defensible view, even if one rejects it. What is not defensible is to respond to it with smear words in place of an argument. So the bottom line here is this. Adrian Lee is wrong because he treats one nation as a factional shibboleth rather than a Disraelian moral tradition. He is wrong because he confuses political vigilance with conspiracy, then tries to taint that vigilance with insinuations about bigotry. He is wrong because he denies an official inquiry finding by blaming a scientist he dislikes, as if disliking the messenger changes the record. He is wrong because he weaponizes identity to raise the price of criticism. And he's wrong because he offers indignation where the country needs analysis. But he is absolutely and fundamentally right to raise these points and to give us the opportunity to debate them and to deal with them decisively. And I wish with my whole heart that Adrian were standing in the place of Kemi Badenoch and putting forward these arguments to the present Prime Minister. The present Prime Minister dwindles into relative incompetence because the leader of the opposition is so useless. If we had a competent leader of the opposition, we might have a competent government. We might not be in the present position of dreading the budget that's coming out in the next couple of weeks. We might not be in the present position of wondering whether or not we're going to end up with another revolving door of prime ministers over the next few years, and how long this Labour government, this Labour Party, can hold power. That level of uncertainty is magnified by the incompetence of the opposition leader and the party that she drags behind her. If you want a single Disraelian sentence to close with, it is this: the real one nation conservative is not the man who shouts loudest about loyalty to a party. It is the one who refuses to let any party, left or right, gamble recklessly with the nation's health, cohesion and dignity. The important lesson to be learnt, I think, is that it doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right. If you are elected to political office, your first duty is to the health of the nation. And I'm afraid both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition are too desperate to consolidate their own party's dwindling support to be genuinely thinking about their first duty. Their first duty is to the country, to the King, to the health of our nation. That has been forgotten.